Welcome back. Now, Deputy President Paul Mashatile has warned that the country needs to do more to prevent the ticking time bomb of poverty, inequality and joblessness from going off. Now, Mashatile issued this warning during his keynote address at the summit of the National Economic Development and Labour Council. In July, a United Nations report on unemployment in South Africa was delivered to Mashatile, describing youth unemployment in particular as a ticking time bomb. Now, according to the latest second quarterly labour force survey that was released by Statistics South Africa, 45.3% of youth, or 4.7 million people, are without jobs. And what needs to be done to avert this unemployment ticking time bomb for the youth? To discuss this matter further, we are joined now on the line or via Zoom by economics advisor at the United Nations Development Programme South Africa, Mr. Rogers Dhliwayo. Mr. Rogers, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
No, good morning.
So firstly, let's just talk about the report and how you went about collecting the data that ultimately you used to compile that report.
You know, how we went through the report is we actually started by, commissioning 6 background papers. And these background papers were really looking at, the youth unemployment issue in South Africa, and also drawing from other international experiences. How have other countries addressed youth unemployment? And that experience was from all over the world, South Africa comparators, the other emerging markets, the developed countries, and so on, and even within the African continent. And one of the paper really looked at even how youth employment service can actually prepare the youth for the job market, for them to transition from education into the labor market. And that paper actually drew from the experiences of Nigeria and Ghana and the other African countries. And also we looked at the experience of Germany, the apprenticeship system, where they blend education system with training people with skills. So, and then after that, the background papers, we synthesized the findings from those background papers into the report. And also we looked at the macroeconomic situation of South Africa. Is it conducive to create jobs? And also looking at even the experience of COVID, what industries really came out of COVID. We all know that during COVID, the use of digital technology increased. And we also found that there were some industries which actually, prospered and were resilient during COVID. And also we try to collect a lot of data, because normally when we produce these human development reports, we also calculate what are called human development indices, really making sure we see where South Africa is, and also looking at even provincial level municipalities and so on. So the report drew from those background papers, and also it's very rich in data in terms of looking at South Africa's development in terms of from a human development perspective.
So, very extensive then. But if we take, a broader look, Rogers, on a global scale, youth unemployment is a significant socioeconomic development issue globally. And it, of course, poses a threat to national development across the world. But the South African context, if we can just zoom into that, what kind of policies do you believe are needed to help address this problem?
The report actually comes up with quite a number of policies. And I think some of the policies talks to how can we, even improve our education system, the quality of education, making sure we prepare these youth for the jobs of the 21st century. Because we know that now the 4th industrial revolution is with us now, even artificial intelligence. How do we make sure we equip these youth with the skills which are necessary for them to seize the opportunities of the 21st century. I think it's quite crucial to make sure that our education system works closely with government, the private sector, and everybody to equip our youth with these skills which are necessary for them to seize the 21st century. It's skills in science, mathematics, and STEM, what we term. And then we also talk, because what we've seen with COVID is that there are some industries which we used to think that they are not tradables. You can't, you don't need to invest in them. But those industries, we found that even agricultural value chains, logistics, business processing, what we call industries without smokestacks, and these rely a lot on technology. So that talks to even investment in infrastructure, public digital infrastructure, so that we nurture those industries without smokestacks. Then also, I think when we talk about that, we also need to address issues of women empowerment, gender inequality, and so on, because what we tend to find is even during COVID, women suffered disproportionately from COVID, even in terms of job losses. So we need, even when we are talking of this youth unemployment, to really address even this gender divide. Then also the other policies, it's one thing I've already alluded to. One of the papers we commissioned was talking of youth employment service. And what we've seen in countries with a very robust youth employment service is that it prepares these youth for the job market. Even simple things like waking up, going to work, and also, keeping time and so on. And also youth employment service also addresses issues to deal with the youth, with social cohesion. Because most countries which were studied in that paper, which provided empirical evidence to that paper. What this youth employment service, what they do is if a youth is from Limpopo, he or she does not serve the youth service in Limpopo, but goes to KwaZulu-Natal or any other province. And by so doing, it actually addresses issues to deal with social cohesion. And also, I think the other thing is also, I think South Africa has got a very robust, social protection system. And I think we need to re-engineer that to make sure that it's actually linked to the labor market. And what are we saying when we say we need to re-engineer it to address even youth unemployment is, we know, like the spatial planning of South Africa, where jobs are and where these youth stay is very far away, and transport costs are quite huge. How can we re-engineer this social protection that we even give these youth transport vouchers? And we also know that the cost of internet is very high. We can even rejig it to have, digital vouchers, so that we incentivize these youth to even go out there to look for jobs. But of course, also the other issue is the issue of coordination. There are a lot of youth employment initiatives going on in South Africa, but all the actors working in this space, they don't work together. How can we have a whole society, a whole government approach to address this youth unemployment? So issue of coordination, so that actors can learn from each other what works and does not work. And also what is important is to learn from other countries' experiences. How have other countries addressed youth unemployment? For instance, Germany, they've got this apprenticeship system, and they blend, training, education with, work, people being attached to employment. So there are quite a number of experiences South Africa can learn from. Last but not least is also the issue of changing the youth's mindset, because I think also the youth have got a role to play. Most of these youth, they tend to shun some jobs which don't pay them very well. But I think we need to inculcate in this youth that, you have to start from somewhere. And when you start from somewhere, it helps you to build a social network. And then that social network will help you to even get a job which will pay you over some time. So even this mindset among our youth needs also to be inculcated at the family level and even at the community level.
Rogers, all of that sounds great. My concern at this point is, this ticking time bomb, does it have a timer? How dire is the crisis in South Africa as we speak?
No, I think it's very dire. We all know what happened in the Arab Spring. It was started by the youth who really were saying, I don't have anything to do. And we have seen it, most of the time when an idle mind, it's a devil's workshop. So really, I think to me, when we look at this youth unemployment, and this report is very blunt in saying, look, South Africa really needs to address this development challenge because, youth joblessness, it's a wasted resource. And really, for South Africa to seize the demographic dividend, we need to make sure that these youth get jobs. And that's why it's quite urgent. And I think that, to really address this development challenge, because, we've seen all over the world that most of when the youth are idle, it's really a recipe for, instability and so on. That's why it's quite pertinent that the recommendations which come from this report, if, policymakers can take them on board. And I think this issue of bringing all government departments together, making sure that they don't work in silos, and also this issue of a social compact, I think it's quite important to really address this development challenge because we need this whole government approach, the whole society approach, because if you look at the recommendation, they talk to, it's not really only the Department of Employment which can address this. It also talks to education. It talks to even building the capabilities of these youth. And when we talk of building capabilities, we are talking of, the life cycle development of these youth, starting from when they are born, the early childhood development, primary education, their health, water and sanitation, even the community they stay, even the issue of transport, which I've alluded to, the issue to deal with even infrastructure, public digital infrastructure and so on. So you can see that, it transcends a single ministry. And even, so that's why we need this government to work as a system. And we also need the private sector to come on board and also, working even with the education system so that they produce the skills which are needed by the economy and even being futuristic in terms of even human resource development so that we produce the youth who are fit for the 21st century.
Rogers, we only have about a minute left, but I have to ask you, you spoke about learning from other countries. You mentioned Germany, but I'm thinking more of a country that is more closely matched to South Africa in terms of the sheer number of unemployed youth. Is there such an example that we can draw on where we're looking at over 7 million young people who are out of employment?
Yeah, I'm saying, when we look at youth unemployment, South Africa is a bit of an outlier if you try to compare it with other countries. And also, it's also an outlier in the sense that in some countries, even African countries, when the youth can't get jobs in the formal sector, they join the informal sector. So the informal sector acts like a sponge to absorb the youth. In South Africa, if you look relatively, the informal sector is very small. So I think those are some of the issues which we need to address. Of course, we've seen it growing since COVID. And I think one issue which we need to address is also how can we make sure we improve the environment of the informal sector, even linking it with the formal sector. And of course, I've talked of youth youth employment service. Nigeria and Ghana have got a very robust youth employment service. And those are some of the countries we draw from in this sixth paper which we commissioned. And that paper actually, shows that, youth employment services actually helps youth transition from education to the labor market in terms of even equipping them with skills and even in building their network. So there are quite a number of countries we can learn from in terms of this youth employment service, how we can even fine-tune it. I know South Africa has got it, but we need to even fine-tune it and bring it to scale. And also, how can we support the informal sector in terms of even making sure that we link it with the informal sector? We even make sure that we extend social insurance to the informal sector, because what we experienced during COVID is people who are in the informal sector, because they don't have a social protection, they were not supported by the social protection system. They had to rely on their network, and some of them went under. So Rogers, we need even to have
my apologies, we have to leave it there, unfortunately. But thank you so much for highlighting this very important issue. And as you say, it's a ticking time bomb, one that government needs to take seriously. Rogers Dhliwayo is economics advisor at UNDP South Africa's country office, speaking about South Africa and the alarming youth unemployment rate. It's 8 o'clock.